course, within a year or two, the Constitution was greatly expanded with the addition of the first 10 amendments, known as the Bill of Rights. Now remember that a few states didn't ratify the Constitution until after we became the USA and George Washington had become president. The reason they held off, or at least that some of them held off, was that it did not include a Bill of Rights.
Massachusetts and the delegates to the Massachusetts delegation were particularly concerned about that. So they voted to approve the Constitution as written, but on the condition that Congress would meet and at the earliest date prepare a Bill of Rights as amendments to the Constitution and send it to the voters.
Many of the state constitutions did already include their own Bill of Rights provisions. So Founding Father James Madison, the great moderate, examined the various state documents and came up with the proposal. Let's run through these important additions to the Constitution. Certainly, here more than 2 centuries later, the most often mentioned and claimed, and what sets America apart from so many other governments, is the First Amendment.
First Amendment is what gives you your right to express your religion freely and also to be free from having a religion established upon you. It also gives you the right to freely speak about anything, including religion. It also gives you the right to assemble, to redress your grievances, and to assemble and petition the government, and the right to freedom of the press. The First Amendment does a lot of work. It's the workhorse of the Bill of Rights. The Second Amendment is very much influenced by what people feel about guns. What it says is a well-regulated militia being necessary to a free state, Congress shall not impair the right to bear arms. It's the only one of the amendments, the Bill of Rights, that has a little preamble, which is the well-regulated militia part. People have been arguing about whether it's about a militia or about an individual right to bear arms ever since.
The roots of this gun rights argument goes back to the point we've discussed, that the Founding Fathers did not trust having a permanent standing army. Such armies tended to overthrow governments, to create dictatorships. If there was a need to defend the country with a large military force, it should be done by calling upon activating the militias, which were well regulated by the federal government, but sort of owned and operated by the state governments, citizen soldiers who typically owned their own firearms. What's really interesting is the language found in the Arizona Constitution, Article 2, called the Declaration of Rights, and written 120 years after the U.S. Bill of Rights. If you go way down to Section 26, you'll find the title Bearing Arms. It reads in part, "The right of the individual citizen to bear arms in defense of himself or the state shall not be impaired." In defense of himself. If the U.S. Second Amendment was worded that way, there would have never been an argument. The Third Amendment meant something at the time but doesn't mean much today, and we've talked about this. It says the government cannot force you to house and feed soldiers in your home. We've also talked about the Fourth Amendment and how it grew out of the Molasses Act.
The Fourth Amendment protects you from unreasonable searches and seizures, and also says that in most cases, a police officer can't search your home without a search warrant. Now, there's certain exceptions to that, but basically, a man's home is his castle, and the Fourth Amendment is what guards that castle.
The Fifth Amendment is best known from TV crime shows where the guy in court refuses to answer based on his Fifth Amendment rights. But there's actually a lot more to it.
The Fifth Amendment is a bit of a Christmas tree. The Fifth Amendment does a lot of duty. It covers a lot of things. The first is it protects you from being compelled to incriminate yourself. It also guarantees you that you're protected from double jeopardy. In other words, you can't be tried by the same sovereign 2 times for the same crime. It also gives you a right to, for instance, not lose your property without just compensation. So a lot of things got stuck onto the Fifth Amendment, and they apply to different areas of the law. But what we think about the Fifth Amendment, really, it comes down to you have a right to remain silent, and that's where all the TV shows happen.
You've heard the expression, quote, "I want my day in court," end quote. Well, that's right, called due process. It's also part of the Fifth Amendment.
Nobody will be, for instance, punished except by the law of the land. So due process is the law of the land. By the time of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, it's articulated as the Due Process Clause. And then in the 14th Amendment, the Due Process Clause is extended and incorporated to the states. So now the federal government guarantees our Due Process Clause. Anytime you go to court, anytime you confront a government agency, anytime a lawyer is representing you, there is a process that has existed before, and that is due to you. And that's what that constitutional guarantees you every day, even if your lawyer or your case doesn't have anything to do with constitutional law per se.
The Sixth Amendment gives you certain rights if you're on trial for a crime.
The Sixth Amendment is another Christmas tree. A lot of stuff is in the Sixth Amendment. One is it gives you a right to a jury trial in a criminal case. It gives you a right to have a lawyer. It gives you a right to compulsory process. So you want to get a subpoena to bring somebody into court to testify for you, it's the Sixth Amendment that does it. So all of those things go into the Sixth Amendment, including your right to a jury in a criminal case. And it's all there packaged in the Sixth Amendment.
The Seventh Amendment gives the right to a jury trial also in cases regarding lawsuits. Now let's go back in history for a moment, not just to England, but other places as well, to talk about our Constitution's Eighth Amendment that addresses a couple of things. The first part reads, "Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed." But it's really the last phrase of the Eighth Amendment that gets our attention. It basically says that there shall be inflicted no cruel and unusual punishment. One essay we saw reads, quote, "Severe historical penalties included the breaking wheel, boiling to death, flaying, disembowelment, crucifixion, impalement, crushing, stoning, execution by burning, dismemberment, sawing, scalpism, and necklacing." Pretty gruesome, but the drafters of the Bill of Rights said, we're not doing that stuff in the United States. Finally, we get to the Ninth and 10th Amendments, which seem the most confusing and the most argued about.
The Ninth Amendment is sometimes been called by some scholars to be an ink blot of history, and that's because they're not really sure what it means. Both the Ninth and 10th Amendments generally say that all the rights that you had before we listed them in the Constitution, well, you still have all those unlisted ones. And that picks up from the structure of the Constitution and the Federalist Papers. So basically the Ninth Amendment says you keep all of your rights, even if we haven't listed them down. The 10th Amendment is, what it says is the rights that we haven't listed are reserved to the states or to the people. And the trouble with that is, well, is it the people in the states? Is it the people in general? And how much do the states still have that power? What does that mean after the Civil War, which was the great struggle between states and the power of states and what rights are still reserved? This is working out today all the time. There's another part of the Constitution proper that says that Congress can have all means necessary and proper to effect its goals under the Constitution. For instance, the goal of protecting the country or to encourage commerce, interstate commerce. So where does the necessary and proper clause begin, and where does the 10th Amendment begin, and how do the two bump into each other? And that's what's being litigated a lot today.